All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to College Week. So glad all of you can join us for this workshop about how to go from public school to private college, presented by AJ Williams from Santa Clara University. And we'll also have a student panel Q&A to follow. Before getting started, though, we want to know who's in our audience. So in a few moments, I will be launching a poll, and go ahead and take a couple seconds to complete that. Also, feel free to use the chat for any comments or questions throughout the presentation. Of course, we ask that you be mindful and respectful in the chat and keep the conversation relevant to the topic. Thank you all again for joining us. And now I will hand it over to AJ to get us started.
Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. AJ Williams here with Santa Clara University, and happy to be here and presenting to you all. A little bit, I guess, about my background. I am, let's see here, boom, I'll close that. I am in charge of the transfer process at Santa Clara. And so I only say that just to let you know that I am used to dealing with applications from folks coming from community colleges, from any type of four-year institution you can think of. And so I usually get a pretty good sort of sense of sort of the lay of the land and how all the different types of options that are out there. And so I have a presentation here that was for something a little bit earlier than this, so it's not specific to this. I'm going to bounce around a little bit. But I think a good place to start, again, when you're having these conversations, is really just sort of getting everybody on an equal footing, right? And talking about, again, that landscape. What does higher education look like? And so when you talk about four-year institutions, when I say four-year institutions, I mean schools like the UCs or the CSUs, Santa Clara, USF, any of those four-year schools you can think of. There are a lot of those out there in the country, right? There are upwards of 2,000 plus four-year institutions of higher learning in the country. And so, regardless of whatever publications you're looking at, US News and World Report, Princeton Review, all that kind of stuff, their job really is to sort of make this as confused and muddled as possible and, put universities and colleges into all these different categories. In my opinion, as someone who has worked in this field for 15, 16 years or so, really universities fall into one of three categories. And so this first slide here kind of speaks to that. And so and on one end of the spectrum, you have traditional liberal arts colleges, right? And we can all, I think of some. If you've heard of the Claremont colleges, Harvey Mudd, Pomona, Pitzer, schools like that, Occidental down in Southern California. Those are small schools, right? My alma mater, the University of Puget Sound, which some of you probably never heard of. I had never heard of it until they started recruiting me for basketball, right? And so there's a ton of schools out there like that. And what I always kind of like to remind folks is that you might not know about it, but although CEOs, doctors, and lawyers of the world, they know about those kinds of schools because that's where they go to, right? And those are the kind of schools that produce them. And so, liberal arts colleges, and I back up a little bit just to say that I like to talk about these different types of schools by size, because I think for students, it's more tangible that way, right? And so on one end of the spectrum, again, you have traditional liberal arts colleges, which range anywhere from about a couple of hundred students to maybe a few thousand students, right? 4,000 or 5,000 students, usually. The benefits of a smaller environment, obviously smaller class sizes, smaller student to faculty ratios, access, right? Access to the people who are teaching you, advising you, things like that. Also with liberal arts, with smaller schools, you'll find higher retention rates and four-year grad rates and things like that, again, because that environment is smaller, right? Some benefits to a liberal arts college is that your education is broad. That might be a drawback as well. You can't go as specific as you might think in terms of different majors and that kind of thing. And so, sometimes a liberal arts school might have a business major, but not a business school, right? So again, some sort of, just sort of broad education there. Sometimes the social aspect of a school that's small can be a bit of a drawback for some folks, right? You talk about 1,500, 2,000, 2,600 students, you pretty much know everybody and they pretty much know you, or at least the folks that you want to know real quick. And so sometimes some drawbacks there. And so that's one end of the spectrum. Definitely some pros and cons, as with any type of institution. On the other side of the spectrum, you have much larger institutions, right? Your big flagship research institutions. And again, here in California, we know of a few of those, don't we? The UCs, the CSUs. And so then you're talking about much larger campuses, right? San Jose State, I think, is around 32,000 students. Berkeley's around 40,000 students. UCLA, about 44, 45,000 students, right? And so, the academic experience there, especially in your first couple of years, you're talking about being in class sizes of 300, 400, 450. The largest classes I've heard of in person, meaning I've read the applications of folks trying to transfer out of these situations, 1,500 and 1,800 respectively. Both of those classes were at the same institution. I won't mention which one, and they were both intro to biology classes, right? Because that's how that university sort of strained out who was serious about bio, about being a bio major, or being pre-med, that kind of thing. The reality, when you're talking about schools and classes that large, is that usually it's a TA, a teacher's assistant, a graduate student who's usually teaching and giving the material to students. And so a different type of environment, academically, that said, if you're talking about those sort of big sports programs, and when you're talking about the Pac-12 and the ACC and schools that you see on TV, those are usually those schools, right? And so socially, a different environment than a very small school, right? And so again, pros and cons with both sides, both types of institutions. And again, it's all about fit. What school do you see yourself, or what kind of environment do you see yourself succeeding in? And so on one end of the spectrum, you have very small, liberal arts colleges. On the other end, you have big, large research institutions. Medium-sized comprehensive schools are in the middle. And to me, a medium-sized school is anywhere in that 5,000 to about 20,000 range, right? And so, they're a mix of both things. They have some research opportunities. They're a liberal arts base in terms of how their academics are centered and things like that. And so when it comes to private schools will usually be in that sort of liberal arts or medium-sized comprehensive school, size range, right? You might have some. USC, for an example, is a pretty large private school, right? Stanford is a pretty large private school. They're in that sort of, close to 20,000 range. But for the most part, private schools are usually in that sort of smaller, medium-sized range, in part because that dollar difference represents, to me, access, right? It represents the amount of access you have to the people and opportunities during your time in school. And so in terms of, the types of schools out there and where students are, again, just bigger picture, good things to know. Most students in the country attend public schools. Nearly about 45% of all the college students in the country attend four-year public schools, again, like the CSUs and UCs, right, and other state school systems. About 33% attend public two-year schools or junior colleges, community colleges. And what I want to make clear here is that the transfer process is much more widespread and utilized than folks realize, right? I think in some communities there can be stigmas, a stigma towards being a transfer student or having to go to community college. The reality is that is much more utilized than folks realize. About a third, I think it's like around, actually about 37% of all college students transfer at some point, whether that's from a community college to a four-year, or from a four-year back to a community college, then to another four-year, or from a four-year to a four-year. About, again, 37% of all college students transfer at some point. And so I just want to make that clear. Only 20% of all college students in the country attend private schools. And again, cost is a big reason behind that, right? Private schools, again, talking about cost. And so this information right here where it says expensive comes from, or where does it come from? It comes from somewhere. all this is sourced, from usually government sources or the College Board, things like that. But the average cost for public four-year schools nationally for the 2018-19 school year is about almost around $30,000, right? For private non-for-profit schools, about $48,500, right? And so again, you see that price difference there. In terms of what you should be thinking about, right? When you are, stepping into high school, your first day, your freshman year, here's kind of some information for you regarding that. And so, your freshman year, and what I'll say too, I'll back up a little bit, in that most private schools are going to look at you as an applicant from first day freshman year, your GPA, all the way through your senior year, right? Depending if you apply early, they'll see your grades from freshman year through your junior year, right? And want to know what classes you're taking senior year. Most public institutions, the CSUs, the UCs, they're only going to calculate a GPA from your 10th grade year or sophomore year, on through the rest of high school. But what I will tell you is that, if you're not paying attention, if you're not developing those good study skills in your freshman year, it ain't all of a sudden going to magically happen in your sophomore year, right? And so my advice is, from the first day you step onto any campus in your high school, know your high school profile. And a high school profile is that information online or in a piece of paper they give you that says, this is what your school offers. This is the years of foreign language, math, science. We offer this many honors courses or AP courses or IB courses. You need to know that, because you need to know what to set your sights on, for that senior year. I'll give you an example. The usual mathematics sort of progression is freshman year, algebra 1, sophomore year, geometry, junior year, algebra 2, and then senior year, pre-calc. Well, most high schools, most public high schools only require 3 years of math. And so I would tell you that you would be hard pressed to find any competitive or selective institution that, would consider algebra 2 a competitive math level, right? And so you're usually going to want to get to that statistics, that calculus level, by your senior year, depending on the projection of your, or the progression of your high school's math offerings. You might need to plan ahead and say, okay, well, I'm going to take summer school this year or that year, that kind of thing, right? So just know your school profile, compare your graduation requirements with your target school's requirements or recommendations. I will say that public institutions usually deal with requirements, right? If you go to the csumentor.org, they'll tell you what the requirements are for entry into any one of their 23 campuses. With private schools, they'll deal mostly with averages, right? They're not going to give you, you have to have this or not. They're going to deal more with averages, right? So again, know your school profile, plan ahead accordingly, push yourself academically, and pursue your passions personally, right? You're a freshman coming into high school. Your sophomore year, I would say a perfect time, if not earlier, to start visiting as many schools as you can. Again, there are thousands of schools out there. We're lucky as Californians that we have a ton of options, and even in the Bay Area, literally right on our fingertips, right? And so get out there and see as many schools as you can, see small schools, big schools, medium-sized schools, public, private, all that kind of stuff. Test prep, and I'll say now, I recognize that we're in a COVID environment, and a lot of schools, Santa Clara included, have gone test optional for the next couple of years. We do not know what that means for the future, right? I think a lot of schools wanted to be test optional because, quite frankly, there's more of a socioeconomic correlation to who does what on tests and all that kind of stuff. It's all about resources. But for the next couple of years, at least, or for the next year in particular, about 70% of all the schools in the country are test optional now. That said, moving forward, we don't know what that means. I think personally, the ACT, the SAT, they're almost kind of too big to fail. If you're familiar with that phrase, they'll be back. They'll be back. And so sophomore year is a good time to start your test prep. A good time to start searching for private scholarships. Okay. Again, private schools, very expensive. The more money you can bring into whatever school you've been admitted into, the better. And sophomore year is a perfect time to get on Google and all those search engines and start doing some searches for private scholarships. Quite frankly, most of them require an essay. You just need little tweaks once you've already written one to apply to others. Junior year, very important academically. That's usually when things start to get a little bit more rigorous in terms of, those AP offerings and things like that, or IB offerings. You need to be taking some of those if your school offers them. Challenge yourself. Keep those grades up. Again, junior year, in my opinion, is a great time to take both tests if they're available and all that kind of stuff. Again, moving forward, in this test optional landscape, though, I want to make sure that it's clear that you do not need to be worrying about those things right now. Okay, I'm just saying, if you are, again, a freshman or a sophomore, that might change down the line. Start applying for those private scholarships. Senior year, retest if you need to, want to, or can. Know and follow all application deadlines, and that goes for financial aid deadlines as well. Okay, never wait till the last minute. A deadline is the last day that you can do something. All right, a little bit more information I want you to know. The national average admit rate, okay, for all those schools in the country, all those 2,000 plus four-year institutions that I mentioned, has hovered in like the 65-66% range for the last few years. Okay, and I say that every time I meet with a group of students, because again, I know we talk this stuff up like it's rocket science, and nobody knows how anybody's getting into school X, Y, or Z. Everybody assumes you need a 4.0 GPA and a whatever on test scores to get into a school. the reality is your chances of getting into most schools when you apply are a lot better than you think. Again, the national average admit rate has hovered in the 65, 66% range. Only 20% of all schools have an admit rate under 50%, right? When you hear that term, a selective institution, that just means they admit under 50%. Well, only 20% of all schools in the country admit under 50%. All those schools with single digit admit rates, your Stanfords, your Ivy League schools, that's like 1 or 2% of all the schools in the land. And so just be smart. Again, do your research ahead of time, and have an idea of what, the schools you're looking at. Graduation rates, okay? Another reason that you might be thinking about private school versus, public institutions. Usually when you hear somebody like myself give a graduation rate or statistic, the standard way of reporting that is a 6-year rate, right? More and more these days, it's taking students 6 years, 5 or 6 years to graduate from college, not 4 years. It's taking students 3 years as opposed to 2 years to transition from junior colleges or community colleges to 4 years, right? And so, again, the national average grad rates, the 4-year grad rate's about 40%, right? Pretty low. The national 6-year grad rate, 58% overall. 66% at public institutions, 37% at private for-profit institutions, right? These, your Phoenix, University of Phoenix and schools like that, right? 37%, that's pretty low. 76% at private not-for-profit schools, right? And so again, some of those benefits to attending a private school, even though it's usually more expensive, is that, those return on investment, those opportunities to have an internship, to study abroad, to get a job right out of school, or have grad options lines up. Usually you see stronger success rates of those things at smaller institutions. And that, again, if there's any way that you can rationalize the big price tag difference between public and private, that's one of the ways that I try to do it. I will say that loans are a reality of college. You should be realistic. Okay. The average starting salary for college graduates is around $50,000. Okay. In 2019, the average amount of loan debt per borrower was about $33,600. And now that might sound like a huge number to some of you, and it's nothing to sneeze at. That's not the crushing kind of debt that you would think about, right? And the reality is, usually when repaying a loan, you get about a 30-year grace period, right? And you can set it up to where you start paying about 6 months after graduation, and you're paying about $100, $150, $200 a month for 30 years. It's kind of doable, right? And especially, again, if you're coming from a private school and you got a job lined up and you're graduating, starting to pay that back might not be too difficult, okay? And so things to think about when you're talking about private schools and all that good stuff. I will stop sharing that and switch over to Santa Clara real quick. All right, boom, 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 doing good on time, okay? And so I'll touch on Santa Clara. Please send questions if you have them, just about anything else. But with Santa Clara, we are, and again, I'll try to make this as open and general as possible, just in terms of sort of the private school talk, right? And so Santa Clara, we're in your backyard, the oldest school in California, oldest institution of higher learning in the state of California, a beautiful school, a really nice school. I've enjoyed working there for 15, plus years or so. A nice place to be. We're a national school, so even though we're in the Bay Area, we're in your backyard. We're a national school. About half our students come from the state. The rest come from all over the country and all over the globe, right? If you are from this area, but you've never moved out of this area, you've never lived outside of California, never lived outside of the Bay Area, we're pretty lucky. We're pretty lucky to be here. And I say that because I'm a native of San Jose, but I've lived in the four corners of the country. I grew up mostly in Pomona, down in Southern California. I lived in Atlanta for a little bit. I went to prep school on the East Coast after high school. We're lucky to be physically located where we are, in that it's one of the more expensive areas in the country, but it's also one of the more productive and dynamic and innovative places in the world. And so, we benefit by living and going to school and experiencing, life here in the Bay Area. And so at Santa Clara, we do pretty well with that. You have to be productive where we are because of what I just said, and our students are. About 80% of our students graduate with internships under their belt, 86%, employed full-time. our graduates are in the top 1% of salaries at graduation, and throughout their careers, throughout in the country. As I mentioned before, the national average starting salary for college students is around $50,000. For Santa Clara last year, the class of 2019, that average salary was $62,500, right? And so again, you got to be productive. You see our top employers there. We're a Jesuit school, so just like Loyola Marymount down in Los Angeles, the University of San Francisco, where one of our student panelists is currently attending, we're a Jesuit school. And so again, sort of big picture, what you'll find is that private schools aren't always religiously affiliated, but a good number of them are. I graduated from the University of Puget Sound, if I didn't say that earlier, a traditional liberal arts school, about 2,600 students up in the state of Washington. I think when they were founded, they had a religious affiliation, but they didn't when I attended there. And so to be a Jesuit school, what that means is that they educate. The goal, the focus is to educate the whole person, mind, body, and spirit, and all of that. What I value about the Jesuit approach is that it is, hands down in my experience, the most open-minded approach to religious studies that you'll find at the higher ed level. And what I might mean by that is that the Jesuits question, they challenge, they're about social justice, doing for others, those bigger societal and global issues, that kind of thing. And the way that that plays out is during your 4 years, you have to take 3 classes in theology, 3 classes in the study of, right? There are 152 different classes that you can take at Santa Clara that will fulfill those 3 class requirements. And so again, no area where anybody's saying, we know the answer for all of this dogma. It's a subject matter, it's an aspect of being and living and all that. The folks kind of want you to spend some time contemplating. And again, I can respect that.
AJ, I'm sorry
yes,
to interrupt.
yes.
If you're sharing another set of slides where we can only see the counseling 101 continued slide.
Oh, really? Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, let's see. Stop share. Boom, boom. All right. So now what do you see?
Just you.
Just me. Okay. So I will share screen again. Let's go. Boom. All right. Boom. Boom. All right. All right. So share screen now. All right. That was a fail. All right. Now can you see?
Yes. Awesome.
Got it. Okay. Good. Good. You're welcome. Thank you. All right, so I'll go back to the pretty picture. It looks nice. There's some stats right there. And again, so, talking about we're a Jesuit school and all that, I covered that. In terms of our educational experience, again, we're a medium-sized school. So we fit into that category of that medium-sized, that 5,000 to 20,000 range. We're about 5,500 undergrad, about 3,000 grad, but the undergraduate experience at Santa Clara is undergrad-centric. Every class taught by a professor, average class size 23, 11-to-1 student-to-faculty ratio. Those are the exact same ratios I dealt with at Puget Sound, which is only 2,600 students, right? So while we're a medium-sized school, it's a smaller environment academically. We're on the quarter system. And so big picture, no matter where you guys end up, whether it's a public or private, East Coast, West Coast, doesn't matter. Generally speaking, 4 classes makes you a full-time college student. On the semester system, you take about 8 classes in the academic year. On the quarter system, in the same amount of time, but on a quicker timetable, you take at least 12 classes. And so things move fast at Santa Clara. The benefit to that, in my opinion, is that you're able to get the classes that you need for your major, for your minor, for a second major or minor, the general ed that you have to take, all that good stuff. And so the size and the speed of things at Santa Clara, playing to the fact that we have one of the higher retention rates in the country, meaning continuation from first to second year, 95%, one of the higher 4-year graduation rates in the country at 88%, right? Again, some of that return on investment from attending a private school. So again, big picture, you want to do your research because sometimes private schools or just schools in general will have their own application. The common application, which is what we utilize, is utilized by about 800 or 900 schools, right? And so the Common App says I'm applying to, Santa Clara University. That's what you would indicate. And then some schools will have a supplemental piece where you designate what division you're applying to within that university. And so with Santa Clara in particular, you apply directly to our College of Arts and Sciences or business school or engineering. Arts and Sciences is our largest division, about 40 different majors there. That's our liberal arts division, right? Business is our most popular at about 25% of the student body, but when I say most popular, the most competitive to get into. And then engineering is only 15% of our student body, but again, we're in the Mecca, the Silicon Valley, in terms of resources for students, okay? And so what I will say is that what you typically find at private schools is that those admit numbers are a little bit higher than the public institutions, because again, the goal of public institutions is to be as accessible to as many folks in the public, and especially from those given states, as possible. And so the applicant pool at private schools is usually a little bit stronger. And so for Santa Clara, for our last couple of years, for example, our average numbers were in the sort of unweighted GPA of a 3.8. It's on a 4.0 scale, a 32 ACT and a 1420 SAT, right? That was the middle of the pack for the students simply admitted. And so you can see that things are a little more competitive. That said, our admit rate for the last few years has hovered in that 45 to 47, 49% range, right? And so again, just things to know. What I'll say is, in terms of paying for school, right? Because Santa Clara and schools like it are very expensive. And I'll stop sharing my screen now. All right, doing good on time. When it comes to paying for school, because that is a big concern for everyone, as it should be, as we saw, from those averages for public education. Public 4 years around 30,000, private not-for-profits around 48, almost 49,000, right? It's a big price tag difference. The FAFSA, right? The FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. I always get happy when I remember that. It's pretty universal. That's utilized by most schools in the country. The CSS profile, sometimes referred to as the profile, is an additional and necessary step that most private schools will ask families to fill out and submit, because it goes a little bit deeper and it provides a little bit more information. Very important when you're applying to really put yourself in the best position possible. With private schools, very big price tags, right? The total cost of attendance for 1 year at Santa Clara right now is about $76,000, okay? 75% of the students who go there receive something to make it work. So we're one of those schools, like most private schools, where on the front end, you shouldn't worry about the price tag. Don't let that scare you. Apply, see if you get in, put yourself in the best position by filling out those forms, but just see where the chips fall, and if it is a realistic option for you and your family. Again, only 20% of all college students attend private schools, and this is usually a big reason why. In terms of merit-based or academic monies, do your research. Some schools will tell you at a college fair, if you have this GPA and this test score, we'll give you this much money. Most schools don't operate that way. And so, do your research. Again, at Santa Clara, we automatically consider students for merit-based money, no matter the time period you apply, early or regular, but those are tough to come by, right? You heard the averages for the students simply admitted. In terms of need-based or merit-based monies, students are generally stronger across the board. But we look at everything. We look at your personal side, all that good stuff. And so I think that's pretty much my time. Please let me know if you have any questions or anything like that. I'll stick around, but I think you have some pretty awesome current students that you're going to hear from in a bit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, AJ. And now presenting Maribel.
Hello, everybody. My name is Maribel. I'm the academic coordinator with San Jose CalSOP, and here we are gonna transition into the second portion of this webinar, and I will be presenting Jojo and Anai, which they are current private school students. If you guys can please turn on your cameras. And if you guys can please just go ahead and do the little intro, say your name, the school that you guys graduated, what year, the school you guys went to, your major, and your career aspirations.
So I'm Anaya Ambrosio, and I graduated from Oberfell in 2017. And I'm currently a senior in Santa Clara University. I'm a psychology major and public health minor, and my career aspiration is to hopefully be a clinical psychologist.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joanne. I, like Anai, also graduated from Overfelt High School in 2017. I'm currently attending the University of San Francisco, where I'm a senior majoring in sociology with minors in African American studies and health studies. And my career aspirations they lie within education, so long-term to work in more administrative roles within education.
Thank you guys so much for that. So throughout this presentation with this student panel, I will be asking them the questions, but if you guys have any questions that you guys would like to ask them, please put it in the chat and then we can get to them towards the end. So to continue on, what was the transition for high school and college like for you guys? So let's start with Anaya and then we can go with Joanne.
For me, it was a little bit difficult. I think the most difficult part was adjusting and meeting completely like different people from high school. So I wasn't really familiar with anyone that went to high school. But eventually I was able to connect with people in my classes and some have become really good friends. So that was good. And one of the surprising parts was how much freedom I had in college with like picking classes, but also like what to do with my time. So like what activities to do and things like that. And that was like a lot of responsibility that I didn't have before. But it also taught me a lot about what I should do, what I shouldn't do, and what I could do.
For me, it was kind of like a mix of being scared, but also being super excited and like feeling like I was ready. And so I think when I first like got to college, I started to do like everything. Like I was joining clubs, I was picking up mentors. I'm also a part of like the scholarship program called the Peninsula Scholarship Fund. And so within them, like we have mentors. And so I felt like I was prepped because I felt like I had like this team. But also being a first generation college student, it's like you have your team, but you're also figuring out what this like college experience is like. And I think for me, I didn't know anybody who went to a private school before I did, or yeah, before I met folks at my actual school. And so I think my experiences, even when I would talk to like friends who were going to like San Jose State or UC Merced, were still very different. And so I think that transition was like filled with excitement, but also filled with like this kind of like worriness that made me like eager to find clubs and create my own community on campus.
Thank you guys. So what kind of communications did you guys have with your parents about college?
Well, I talked a lot with my parents about college, and they were actually the ones to encourage me to apply to private colleges, because even though I was doing okay in high school, I didn't really have the confidence to do that. So it was really helpful to be able to talk to them about what I wanted to do, and also them telling me that it was possible. So I think that was we had a really good communication in that aspect. And then once I was accepted, they're really supportive of like whichever college I wanted to pick, and also congratulating and things like that.
Mine is also very similar to Anai. My mom was always the one who was like, you have to get an education. And so for her, education was kind of like, that was what you were like, you had to do in order to be successful, right? And so whenever it came to school or whenever it came to ideas of like being a college student, she definitely made it to where I started to picture myself being able to do that and like being able to graduate. But again, kind of like being first gen always kind of, it got kind of like confusing at times because she of course understood that like education was good, but she also didn't know what the college experience like was like for herself. And so she's my biggest cheerleader, but I will never forget when I changed majors. I was like, Mom, like, I don't want to do kinesiology anymore. I want to like switch over and go to like sociology. And I was calling her and I'm like, of course, kind of freaked out because I'm like, do people change majors? Like, am I not going to be on track to graduate on 4 years? What am I doing? Right. And so I call her and I'm like, what am I supposed to do? Like, I'm freaking out. And she was like, do whatever's best for you. And I was like, okay, whatever that means. And so I realized that it was hard for her to always give me guidance, but her support was always there. And so she was like, we're going to figure it out, even if I don't particularly know all the answers. And so she made me super like confident with like asking for help and those kind of things. And so, yeah.
That's great that you guys both had the support. What were your expectations about college, and did college meet your expectations?
Well, my expectations of college was that it was going to be like really difficult and that I was going to be lost because of like the size of the campus and things like that, compared to high school and where I've been. So it kind of met my expectations, because like the academic coursework was more rigorous and like it was more difficult. I would say like the discipline to like study and like having to study for exams and things like that. But about the campus, well, and Santa Clara University isn't actually that that big. So I was kind of that didn't really happen of like me being lost. So the classes were also smaller, and I wasn't expecting that either. But that also helped me with like meeting more of my classmates and meeting my professors. So that was something that I didn't expect, but it was good.
I would say that college has met my expectations. I think going into it, I was super intimidated. I was like, smart people go to college, and I hadn't gained the confidence to call myself smart. So I was like, I don't exactly know what I'm doing, but I'm gonna do it. And so when I started to like actually get into classes, and when I started to realize kind of like you have a little bit more freedom to express yourself academically, and also not necessarily like always be like this like correct student, if that makes sense. And so I would say that it met my expectations like academically, as to like it was going to be a lot tougher, but I was still able to like very much keep up, and it wasn't as like bad as I thought it was. I would say community wise, it surpassed my expectations. I didn't really know what it would be like to like go to a whole school that I absolutely know nobody at. And so being able to kind of like find my community within there, and also like really have like those lasting relationships with them, has definitely surpassed what I thought it was going to be.
How has school been different from online to in person? Just because I know that there might be seniors in the audience, and like what advice would you give them during this time, since you guys are doing college online right now? And I know that's like a curveball, but attendees, please feel free to put some of your questions in the chat too.
I think there's multiple ways to kind of like go about online school. I think for me, being online has definitely made me check myself about spending self-care time with myself, because personally for me, like I have jobs, and so those are all remote, and I'm also doing school remote, but I also have assignments. So I'm spending super long hours being in front of a screen. So I always have to remind myself, okay, take at least like an hour break to rest your eyes and not be so like consumed on the laptop. And definitely to just kind of stay organized. So if you, my favorite way to stay organized is definitely using Google Calendar. If it's not on my calendar, I probably don't know what's happening. So definitely I have like my schedule of like what I have to do for the day. And also if there's like any major assignments, I also just like tap those on there. So staying organized and also remembering to just check out of online things for a second.
I think another helpful thing would be to establish a routine. So with in-person classes, it was easy to like know, okay, this is class time, and then I'll go study, and then I'll have lunch and stuff like that. But online, and you're home all the time, it kind of like disrupts that. So if you kind of create that routine of like getting up, dressing, then having like a set time to do things, then that can be helpful to also stay organized. So.
Thank you guys so much for sharing. What piece of advice do you wish you had listened to more during high school? And this can be during senior year.
Well, for me, it would be like staying involved and like looking for activities that I like really enjoyed or like to do. So in high school, I wasn't really that involved in like school like clubs and things like that, and I think that really took away of like the types of experiences that I could have had, or the kind of knowledge that I could have used for college too. So even putting myself out there like in meeting new people and things like that could have helped me with my relationships also in college, and also with like being able to divide my time. I think that would have been helpful too.
I would say it's kind of hard because I really have always done a lot and I still do a lot. So it's kind of like, I guess in high school, I didn't know that I wanted to go to college. And I didn't know until like, honestly, like junior, senior year, I was like, okay, like this can actually be very much a reality. And so I think really throughout high school, what helped me is that I had teachers and like just different faculty who could see that I had the potential, and they always reminded me to like believe in myself. And so I think it's not something that I would wish for, but I think it's something that I wish I kind of like sat with and like internalized during that senior year, because of course you're going through this point where you're presenting yourself to these colleges through these applications, and you're sometimes getting rejections and you're also getting acceptances. And so I think just simply being able to recognize your own potential, and also understand that like you have cheerleaders in your life telling you that for a reason. And so when you get into places, like don't ever second guess it and don't doubt it, because obviously you are meant to get that acceptance, and obviously there might be a potential journey that you can go on through there.
Jojo, you took the last question out of my mouth. But if you have another advice that you guys would like to give to the attendees, and then this would be the last question if you guys don't have any other questions.
I would say my other piece of advice is really just to do you. Like, you really don't have, I mean, you could go to college whenever, right? You do have that like access to it. You can be 30 going to college, you could be 50 going to college. But if you're going to college right out of your high school, right out into from senior year, really just take a second to enjoy it, enjoy every second of it. We're getting to this place where we're paying for an education, right? And so you want to make sure that you're utilizing the resources that are on campus, whether that's like a career service center, whether that's different clubs and organizations. You want to make sure to continue building your network, but also enjoying your experience, because that only happens once. You only get to experience college at 17 or 18 that one time. So of course, stress about the assignments, but also stress about having that experience and making it worth it.
I would say also just looking at the resources that your school, or if you're going to college, what they offer, because I didn't really, I wasn't really looking for that when I first, like when I was a freshman. But then now looking at all of the things that are actually available, I'm kind of regretting not using them before. So your college probably would have a lot of resources, like she said, about career opportunities and things like that. So kind of like look out for those and don't be afraid to use them because they're there for you to use. So.
Great. Thank you guys so much for taking some time out of your day. I know you guys have a busy schedule. And remember for the attendings to submit your financial aid, your college apps. The due dates are almost due, are almost here. So I'll pass it back to you, Kristen.
Wow, thank you all so much. What a great workshop, sharing your experiences and knowledge with our attendees. Thank you all so much for sticking around. I have launched the poll as well as the survey in the chat. We really do appreciate your feedback. So if you can open those up and complete it, again, we'd really appreciate it. I don't see any questions. So as of now, that concludes our presentation. Thank you again, panel students, for joining us and sharing your experience. Thank you, Maribel, for facilitating as well. Appreciate it. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.